In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can use the properties or the characteristics of our new shapes in order to classify them. And this will involve either looking at a shape and listing its properties or looking at a list of properties and determining which shape it represents. If at any point you need a refresher on the different properties of each shape, flip back through your notes packet to the beginning, pages 1 through 5, and you'll find that same information that we included on our flashcards has been provided there for you. And if we look at this diagram here, we have a Venn diagram that sorts our shapes for us. Everything that we see in this diagram is a quadrilateral, meaning that it is a polygon with 4 sides and 4 angles. So we have all of that. Okay. Over here we have the trapezoids, which we didn't get to those last class, depending on where you are, but those are 4-sided figures with just one pair of parallel sides, as we can see here. If we look at the rest down here, we can see that everything else lives within the parallelograms of here, which means that every other shape has 2 pairs of parallel sides. So everything here, parallelograms, rectangles, squares, and rhombuses, all have 2 pairs of parallel sides. Within that we have the rectangles that have 4 right angles. We have the rhombuses that have 4 congruent sides. And the overlap between those two are the squares, which have 4 right angles, so the design from the rectangle, as well as 4 congruent sides, the sides of a rhombus. So a square belongs to all these groups. It's a rectangle because it's got 4 right angles, it's a rhombus because it has 4 congruent sides, and it's a parallelogram because it has 2 pairs of parallel sides. This family tree is just another way of representing that information. We won't be talking about the kites. When we look at the family tree, we can use the tree to make determinations about which shapes belong to which group. And as I move down the family tree, that's going to be where we use the word some. So I would say that some quadrilaterals are parallelograms, but not all of them because we've got these guys over here. Some rectangles are squares. When I go up, that's where we're going to say all or every. So I would say that every square is a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides. Every square is a parallelogram. All rectangles are quadrilaterals. All isosceles trapezoids are trapezoids. We are never going to go side to side. So that would be no or none. So no parallelograms are trapezoids. No isosceles trapezoids are a rhombus. Okay, so now we want to be able to think about which shapes have all equal angles. And this is where it's going to be really important that you know the characteristics of the shape. So all equal angles means that I have to have 4 right angles. And 4 right angles has to be a rectangle, where we have the word angle. And then if I think back to my tree diagram, underneath rectangle, we also have squares. So our other option here has to be a square. We can go ahead and check our answer here, and we can see that we got that one correct. So all shapes that have equal angles are the rectangle and the square. Next, we want to know which shapes have exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. So if we go back to our diagram here, parallelogram is 2 pairs of parallel sides. Trapezoid was just 1 pair, so everything in the trapezoid family has 1 pair of parallel sides. So that means our answer here would be trapezoid and isosceles trapezoid. Next, we wanted to know which shapes have 2 sets of opposite sides congruent. So I'm going to go back to our diagram here. Quadrilateral is just 4 sides. We don't talk about the lengths of those sides. The key definition of a trapezoid is just that 1 pair of parallel sides. In a parallelogram, the opposite sides are congruent or equal. So we have 1 pair left and right, and then another pair top and bottom. So everything in the parallelogram family, parallelogram, rectangle, rhombus, and square, have 2 pairs of parallel congruent sides. So we're going to get back here. And we say again opposite meaning across, congruent meaning equal, and that's these 4 shapes. Okay, shapes that have all congruent sides. So I know that all congruent sides was the defining characteristic of my rhombus. So that means that anything underneath the rhombus family is part of this answer. And the only thing underneath rhombus is square. So my two shapes with all congruent sides are just the rhombus and the square. Next, we want to know which shapes have exactly one set of opposite sides congruent. Exactly means only one set. So we can't have more than that. We can't have less than that. This means only one set of opposite sides congruent. So if I go back to my diagram, everything in the parallelogram has two sets of opposite sides congruent. So we've got the left and right, and then the bottom and the top. So nothing on the parallelogram works for this one. Trapezoid has one set of parallel sides, and we know that the isosceles trapezoid is where those legs are congruent. And that's the only shape we have where we have exactly one pair of opposite congruent sides. So here, our answer is going to be the isosceles trapezoid. All right. So now we want to go the other way. We're going to be given a shape, and we want to look at the characteristics and determine which groups that shape belongs to. So the first thing I see when I look at this picture is I see all those right angles marked off. So I see this one, and this one. And as soon as I see 4 right angles, I'm thinking rectangle, because rectangle, with that word angle, is those shapes with 4 congruent right angles. The next thing I notice is that all of my sides have the same length. Whenever that happens, that means that this shape is a rhombus. The next thing I notice is that I have 2 pairs of parallel sides. The top and the bottom run parallel, and the left and the right sides are parallel. So that means that this is a parallelogram as well. The last thing would be when I combine rectangle and rhombus, I know that those shapes, when they put together, are squares. So we have 4 options here, and then there's one more that I forgot, which is the quadrilateral, because we have 4 sides here. So even though the best name for this is a square, and that's the name that we use most often, this also falls in the same category as rectangles, parallelograms, quadrilaterals, and rhombus should be on this list as well. That one's missing. All right. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can identify all the groups that this shape belongs to. All right. So again, the first thing that I notice with this shape is that we have those 4 right angles. So that's going to be a rectangle. We also notice that we have opposite sides congruent, as well as opposite sides parallel. Those opposite sides are never going to intersect. So that means that this is a parallelogram. The other thing that I notice is that this shape has 4 sides, so that makes it a quadrilateral. And the best name here is rectangle. And if rectangle was the first thing that I figured out, I could go back to my tree diagram, and I could say, okay, here's rectangle. And going up, all rectangles are parallelograms and quadrilaterals. So I know that I've got all the names that I need, and we'll go ahead and check our work here. We've got quadrilateral, parallelogram, and rectangle. Okay, next we want to know which groups does this shape belong to. So go ahead and pause the video and try that. All right. First thing that I notice is that this shape has 4 sides, so it's a quadrilateral. Then I also notice we've got these markings here, which means that all the sides are congruent. So that means that this is a rhombus. I also see that our opposite sides are parallel. So we've got those top and bottom running parallel, the left and right running parallel. So that means that this is a parallelogram. We can also use our tree diagram. If we go to rhombus, everything from rhombus up includes parallelogram and quadrilateral. So even though rhombus is the best name, these names also apply to the shape as well. Okay, now we want to try this one. I can see that my opposite sides are congruent, and my opposite sides are also parallel. So that means that this shape is a parallelogram. And if it's a parallelogram, that means that it has 4 sides. So it's also a quadrilateral. I can see here that the opposite angles are congruent, but they're not all congruent, so it's not a rectangle or a square. The sides aren't all the same, so it's not a rhombus. And I have two pairs of parallel sides, which means it cannot be a trapezoid. So our only answers here are quadrilateral and parallelogram. All right, go ahead and pause the video and see if you can identify this shape. All right, so if I look at this, the first thing that I notice is that I only have one pair of parallel sides. If we were to extend the other sides, they would eventually cross, and if they're going to cross, that means they're not parallel. So we only have one pair of parallel sides, which means that this is a trapezoid. And now if I look, I can see that I have these markings here which tell me that these sides are congruent. So that means this is a special trapezoid called the isosceles trapezoid. It's a goofy word to spell, to say, but it just means that we have two equal sides. And so we have a trapezoid, an isosceles trapezoid, and I forgot quadrilateral because this one does only have 4 sides. All right, go ahead and pause the video and see if you can identify the groups that this shape belongs to. Okay, similar to the last one, again, I only see one pair of parallel sides. So that means that this right away is a trapezoid. But I don't have any markings telling me whether these non-parallel sides are congruent, so we can't say that it's an isosceles trapezoid. However, I do know that there are 4 sides, so we can call this a quadrilateral. And if we go to check our work, we will see that those are the only 2 names that work for this shape. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can identify the groups for this last one. All right. Now if I go to check this out, I can see that I have 4 sides, so this is a quadrilateral. But if I go to check my next characteristic, which was the 2 pairs of parallel sides for parallelograms, I can see that these 2 sides intersect here, these 2 sides are going to intersect. If I extended this side, these are going to intersect. If I extended this, they're going to intersect. So I don't have any pairs of parallel sides. I also don't have any equal sides. I don't have any equal angles as far as I know. So quadrilateral is actually the only name that we can select for this shape.